Welcome back to Make It Stick. Let's jump into Anki to begin with. All right. 9 sections and 9 subsections of Chapter 4 embrace difficulties. How learning occurs, encoding consolidation, retrieval, extended learning, updating retrieval queues, effort. Now, easier isn't better, how effort helps, reconsolidating memories, broadening mastery, creating mental models, improving versatility, priming the mind for learning, fostering conceptual learning. Other learning strategies that incorporate desirable difficulties, failure in the myth of errorless learning. An example of generative learning, undesirable difficulties, the takeaway. Boom. That was pretty good. What are the 6 sections of Chapter 2 to learn retrieve? To learn retrieve. The takeaway, studying the testing effect in the wild, studying the effects of the field. The takeaway, the testing effect. The myth of mass practice. The myth of mass practice. Retrieval practice. The myth of mass practice, the testing effect. Studying the testing effect in the wild. Or in the lab, studying the testing effect in the wild. It's right there. Dang it, dude. The myth of mass practice. No, that's not that. Reflection is a form of practice. The testing effect, studying the testing effect in the lab, studying the testing effect in the wild. Something to take away. Dang it, dude. Exploring nuances. That's the only thing I missed. All right. We'll see that one again tomorrow then. What did we learn about yesterday? All right, so we're in the final chapter, Make It Stick. Right now we're in the subsection, tips for students, and we're in the second one. It's spaced practice, okay? So spaced practice, what is it? It's retrieval practice. Retrieving something, returning to something multiple times, but not in one single session. It's with time interspaced, like between retrieval sessions. Interleaving, this is a form of retrieval practice. What is the optimal amount of retrievals? What is the optimal frequency? We don't know. It also depends on the person, the familiarity with the subject, previous knowledge, as well as the subject itself. But typically we're talking like about a day or more minimum. You know, that night of sleep, I think, is a big player to that consolidation and brain change and learning. And however, if you want to remember anything for life, you want to never forget something, then you're going to have to periodically return to it, retrieve it, periodically forever. The spacing keeps getting longer and longer. There's got to be more in there. Right, so our mind, like our intuition, it wants to be like, mass practice, rereading, reviewing notes, highlighting. This feels productive. We can see in mass practice, things getting better. You keep playing the same thing on guitar, you'll see it get better. You keep trying to do the same problem, you'll see it get better. But the thing you're not seeing, however, is that most of these gains, if not all of them, depending on scenario, is really just coming from you got this idea in short-term memory and you're building on it and you're working short-term memory, not actually developing the infrastructure in the long-term memory. So you keep making gains and gains and gains, right? But what you don't see is that quickly after that, those gains evaporate. right? We all have experienced it in one way or another, but without the science behind it, or you looking at the science, you're most likely to believe in this. Like, you see it, you believe it. You're getting better, so you think this is the best way to study. You think that just quicker forgetting, and that's just part of learning. So what do? You aim to cram. You wait till the last minute, and then you try to cram it all in your brain, and then regurgitate it before it all goes away. That's the typical, um, you know, best strategy a student intuitively thinks of. So I think that's most of it. What else are we missing? Use pen here. Got one. Can't wait to have my own place, I'll tell you that much. I think we also finished, I think we might have finished the end of retrieval practice section. So our minds, they want to, or we intuitively think that rereading is effective. This goes along with the intuitively thinking mass practice is effective. Rereading just simply, it's not after a certain level, and retrieval, or the thing that rereading and reviewing and highlighting are more effective than retrieval. It's not, even if your intuition says so, it's not. And doesn't mean that they're completely worthless, but they're just really not very effective. Right, and if you use retrieval practice throughout like a course, then by the time it's time for testing, you really won't have to study and cram very much. Like, you won't really have to study that much. You'll just be mostly refreshing your ideas, remembering things you've already learned, because you've already learned them through retrieval. Spaced, okay. All right, that looks pretty good. I'm gonna continue reading now, and then I'll be back to retrieve what I learned at the end. All right, I'm gonna attempt to recall this, even though I got called in the middle of my reading, so I was a little interrupted, so it may make it even more difficult to retrieve, but likely that's even better. We finished the interleaving. We finished the we finished the spaced practice section. Did we do that yesterday? No. So the spaced retrieval practice section. This is kind of like pairing spaced retrieval practice. Spaced practice with retrieval practice is like the gold standard, the goated system for actual learning, the two most effective learning techniques. So spaced practice, like the forgetting in between, the little bits of forgetting in between spaced practice sessions, that actually leads to more learning, deeper learning. Even though massed practice can feel like you're mastering it, right? We already talked about this. It feels more effective. It's not compared to spaced practice. It's a myth that you can just, it's a very common myth that you can just burn something into memory through sheer repetition. Not so. Only if you're going to use spaced practice and spaced reps, not all in one session and just sheer repetition. Okay. Yeah, more brain growth, more development, updating long-term memory with the retrieval, especially with some forgetting. Even if it feels awkward and uncomfortable, like kind of right now, like that leads to more learning. We started the blocked practice. No, we didn't. We started the interleaved practice section. This is the third study tip for students. Interleaved practice, this is mixing up practice, specifically when you're talking about problem types mostly. So you've got a problem type. As soon as you get a rudimentary understanding of that problem, how to solve it, you start mixing it up with other types of problems. This is going to feel more difficult. It's going to look like you're making less progress, but you're not. You're actually learning more. Compare this to blocked practice. So we had retrieval practice versus rereading and reviewing. We had spaced practice versus mass practice, and now we have interleaved practice versus blocked practice. What is blocked practice? Blocked practice. Well, first of all, if you see the pattern, it's like, I've realized how much of this book is intuition, the common intuition for learning, and actual science and what is effective for learning. It's crazy. But blocked practice is essentially trying to mastering something before moving on to the next problem. So you keep drilling like the same type of whatever, how to calculate the volume of a cone until you got it down, and then you go to the next one instead of doing it once, twice maybe, and then starting to mix it up. Even with after students see through empirical evidence, their own hands-on experience in the grades, that they did better on the interleaved practice, they end up not believing it and sticking with blocked practice or mass practice. Blocked is really just mass practice in a lot of ways. There's a baseball study that we read about earlier, and it was batting practice, and so basically blocked practice versus interleaved practice. One group was blocked, so it was like speedball first, 15 throws, then curveball, then like change up for 15, 15, 15, 15. And the other group was just random, mixed up. Well, the blocked practice ended up doing better in practice, right? They kept getting better and better in practice within a single session. The interleaved seemed to be making much progress, but after a couple of weeks, the block practice didn't really make any improvements. The interleaved group did. And it kind of is like the interleaved group is just, making small progress, but it compounds, it builds on each other, versus interleaved or block practice is like quick gains, quick for getting back to baseline, quick gains, quick for getting back to baseline. Interleaved's like a little tiny step up, but if you expand that over a long time, you're like so far over here, versus this guy over here is still going up and down, up and down, up and down every mass practice session. So I think that's most of it. Again, the intuition versus what the actual science says. Right, interleaved practice leads to developing discrimination skills. That is the ability to decipher problem type and what solution to actually use, what type of tools to actually use. And this leads to the ability to actually solve real world problems. It gives you dynamic understanding of the underlying principle, like an actual conceptual understanding of the underlying principles behind the problems, behind the tools and problem tools. All right. Right, mass practice versus space practice. Mass practice feels easier, worse for learning. Space practice feels harder, better for learning. All right, more cognitive effort, more learning, more brain change. That's it for today. Tomorrow we'll begin the last section of study tips for students, I believe. Yep. Nope. Then there's going to be stories after that. But it's going to be, what we're reading tomorrow is going to be about other effective study techniques. So that's going to be variation, generation, reflection, elaboration, things along this line, calibration. So that's it for today. I'll talk to you tomorrow. See ya.